friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Mermaid for You, Life is Good, and Christmas Fishes. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with my mermaid's skin, and for that I'm using E000, E00, and E11. So a little E11 up under her hairline and on the underside of her arms, right on her chest area and the sides of her belly, and then blending out with the E00 and using the E000 for a nice highlight. And then I'll also take these shades and color in my conch shell. I'm just using the lightest two shades though, the E00 blended out with the E triple. And then I'm going to move on to some darker brown shades. I'm using E50, E51, E53, and E55 for my sandcastle. So I'm starting with the E55 and laying in some shadows for that, just depending on the different parts of it and figuring out where the parts that would be recessed would be so that the light wouldn't hit as much, and just adding a bit of definition to that all around. I'm also going to fill in the windows with that E55. Then I'll grab the E53 and start to blend that out, just making sure to go right over the edge of the E55 so that I can smooth things out and not leave behind any harsh lines. And if you wanted to, you could just use 3 shades instead of 4, but I really wanted to have a nice bit of contrast on this sandcastle. So once I finish up with that E53, I'll use the E51 and continue filling that in, but I'm just going to leave a little bit of space left for that E50. So if you wanted to, you could just fill in with the E51. And once I have that laid in, I'll just come in with that E50 and fill in any remaining white space. So just a few little highlights here and there. And then I'm going to let this sandcastle dry for about 30 seconds to a minute. So in the meantime, I'm going to work on my rocks. I wanted those to be kind of a mixture of brown and gray. So I'm just going to throw a little bit of the darkest 3 shades in there and add a bit of streakiness to that, just feathering that color in using the side of my markers. And then I'll go back to my sandcastle now that it's had time to dry and add a little bit of dot detail to give it that sandy texture. So I'm going to do that with the E55 first. And then I'll also add some E53 in there as well. So just those darkest 2 shades. I'm not going to add any others. I'm going to continue using the brown tones, but I'm going to darken it up by adding in E57 and E59 to do my mermaid's hair. And normally I color hair lightest to darkest, but because this is more of a simple illustration and there's not a lot of like highlights and lowlights to add, I'm just going straight in with my darkest shade, the E59, and then blending that out with the E57. And then I used the E55 for the highlight, so I didn't end up using that E53 at all. And I think that the more simple coloring just suits these images better. And then I'm going to move on to some grays. I'm using the toner grays today with T3, T5, and T7. So starting with that T7, I'll add a bit of that to my rocks. I'm not going to be too heavy-handed with this darkest shade because I don't want the rocks to get too black. I just want them to be kind of like a soft, dark charcoal gray with a little bit of brown mixed in. So once I have the T7 laid in, I'll blend that out with the T5, and then I'll add the T3 to kind of fill in any remaining white space and also just go over some of the brown areas so that they blend and meld a little bit better. To smooth that out even further, I decided to bring in the T1 and just go lightly over the brown areas on the rock. I don't want them to disappear completely. I just want them to soften into the gray tones. And then I'll also use these shades to do my little clam gift. I'm going to skip over the T7 and just start with the T5 and then blend out with the T3. And then I'll fill in the highlighted areas with the T1. And then I'm also going to do all of the other clams on my Christmas tree with this combo. So starting with the T5, just a little bit of that, and then blending out with the T3, but saving most of that room for the T1. And I even left a little bit of white space at the tips. And then I'm going to bring in the T0 and use the T1 and T0 for the white parts of my Santa hats. And I will let that fade into the white as well. So I just put a little T1 toward the back of the hat where it would be in most shadow, blend it out with the T0, and then let the white cardstock be the highlight. And I forgot one of the extra clamshells, so I just went back and colored that in. Then I'm going to use some orange tones. I pulled out YR12, YR14, and YR18. And I'm going to color in my crab. I typically color crabs red, but since he's going to have a red Santa hat, I didn't want his body and his hat to be the same color. So I decided to go with the orange, and I think that works really well for a crab. So YR18 first for the shadows, and then blend it out with the YR14. And then I'm leaving a little bit of space in the center of the face and on the tops of the claws for that YR12. And then while I have these shades out, I'm also going to do my two starfish. So the one on top of the Christmas tree and also the little separate smaller starfish. All of the starfish that I've ever seen out in the ocean have been this kind of dusty orange shade, although I'm pretty sure they come in other colors as well, but I thought that was a fun shade for them. And then I let those dry and went back in with a bit more dot detail on the starfish and the crab, just to give him an extra bit of personality as well, and to give the starfish some texture. And then I'm going to move on to my reds. I'm using R24, R29, and R39, and I'll do my mermaid's bikini top. I'm also going to do the ribbons on the gifts. So I'm going to kind of bounce around and just do a couple images at a time because I don't want to let the marker dry too much on the paper before I start to blend it out. So R39 first, blend it out with the R29, and then I'll use that R24 for the highlight. I think this is a really lovely Christmassy red combo. And then of course I'll do my Santa hats on my fish and my crab. So again, the R39, I'm just putting that towards the bottom where the hat is kind of bent over itself, so it would be casting more of a shadow there. And then blending up with the R29 and then using the R24 at the very top for a highlight. On that one Santa hat, I accidentally grabbed the R29 instead of the R24. So I just switched that out quickly and finished coloring. And then I'm also going to do all of these little, they almost look like little bulbs on the seaweed tree. I decided to do those in red as well. And since they look like the feathery fern type plant that's over towards the side, I decided to color that in red as well. I've never colored it in anything but green, I don't think. So I think it was a fun addition though. It looks almost like they picked the petals of that plant to add to their Christmas tree as decoration. So anyway, I just thought that was like a fun little detail to add. And it just makes the Christmas tree look more festive. Then I'm going to move on to some greens. I'm using YG03, YG05, and YG07 for my mermaid's tail. Started with the YG07 on the left, blended toward the right with the YG05, and then the YG03 is going to be a highlight. And I did go back in there with the darkest two shades because I felt like they kind of got lost on the first layer. And then I'm also going to do my two fish at the top with this combo. I was trying to figure out what colors I wanted to do for them because I didn't really want to bring in any yellow for this card. I just wanted to keep the color palette very simple. And then I decided to make them like little Grinch fish, like after the Grinch has had his change of heart and his heart grows, you know, because obviously they're smiling, they're not looking any like grumpy fish. But yeah, so those are my little Grinch fish, and I decided to add a bit of dot detail to them as well, and also to my mermaid's tail so that it would look nice and scaly. And then I also used this combo for the smaller wrapped gift with the shading down at the bottom and the highlight at the top. Then I'm going to switch to a cooler toned green. I'm using G12, G14, and G16 for all of my seaweed. So G16 first, blend it out with the G14, and then I'll use the G12 as the highlight. And then I'll also use these shades for my Christmas tree since they're made from the same plant. And I think some of those areas at the bottom where it's kind of woven together are meant to be white, but I just wanted it to look really nice and full. So I colored in those spaces as if they are just extra leaves back there. I think it would look nice either way. But yeah, I'm just going to finish up with this little Christmas tree, this little kelp Christmas tree. I love images like this that really set the scene and just kind of crank up the imagination. So yeah. So obviously I'm doing another Christmas in July card. Right now we have our Christmas in July challenge over at Lawn Fanatics, which is a card challenge blog using Lawn Fawn stamps. So definitely check that out if you're interested. We have new challenges twice a month. I'm going to go in with R11, R20, and R22 for some rosy cheeks for my crab and my fish. Just the darkest two shades on the crab and the fish, but I did use a little R11 on the mermaid to soften that on her lighter skin. And then I grabbed a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen to go over the eyes of my fish and crab. And I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm taking the Lawn Fawn Desert Canyon backdrop and trimming that out of a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock. And because it is a perfect fit, I want to make sure that that is lined up nice and straight. So I'm just taping it into place with some Post-it tape, running that through my die cutting machine, and then I'll pop that die out. And I'm going to ink blend on this using some Distress Oxides. So I wanted this to be kind of like an underwater canyon, so I'm going to start with some antique linen down at the bottom since that is going to be the sand, and I'm going to add a bit of that to the rocks as well, just like I already added the tan colors into the rocks that I Copic colored. And then I'm going to darken that up with some gathered twigs, so I'm just going to bring that in from the sides and from the bottom, just defining those edges and really making that stitching detail pop all along the edges. And I was getting a little bit of fray down at the bottom from the edge of the die, so I kind of just smoothed that out with my thumbnail. Then I'm going to bring in Hickory Smoke. I left the die complete for now because I thought it would be easier to blend these colors on and not bend those thinner little rock outcroppings. So I left the sky piece there since I'm not going to use that anyway, and I'm just blending right over it so that I can get a nice bit of that hickory smoke on there. I also added some of that to the top edge and took that down into a bit of the antique linen. And then I'll go back to the antique linen to kind of just blend that out a bit better and smooth out those colors so that they have a nice transition. Then I'll bring in some black soot, and I want to darken up that top edge and also add a bit of that into my rock outcroppings. So I'll just blend that on from the top and as much as I can before I have to pop out the sky piece to be able to get to those smaller rock outcroppings. And then I'll just peel that out. There was one little spot in there that didn't quite die cut, so I just kind of pulled that out with my fingers. And then I'm going to add a bit of that black soot to the edges of those rocky outcroppings and just define them a bit better. To give the sand some texture, I'm going to do some splatter detail with the two brown shades, so the antique linen and the gathered twigs. So I'm pressing that ink onto an acrylic block. I'll add a bit of water to those, mix it up with a thin paintbrush, and splatter that all over the background. And I don't mind if that gets on the rocks as well. It's going to end up looking like little particles floating in the water, so it's totally fine. I will say I added a bit more water to the gathered twigs than I normally do, so it was a bit runny and I got larger droplets than I really wanted. So I grabbed a paper towel and just blotted some of those up and helped them dry back into the cardstock so they aren't quite so noticeable. I set that panel aside to dry, and now I'm starting with a clean piece of Bristol to work on my ocean. I'm going to do a green ocean for something a little bit different that also will help tie in with the holiday colors that I used for my images. So I'm adding some cracked pistachio to the center in kind of like a circle. And then I'll bring in some lucky clover from the top and the two sides. I'm not worried about the bottom because it'll be covered up by the desert canyon backdrop. So I'm just bringing that lucky clover in all around the cracked pistachio. And then I will go back to the cracked pistachio and kind of work my way out from the center again to help blend those a little bit better. I'll go back to the lucky clover and blend that back over once again. And then once I'm happy with how that is looking, I'm actually going to bring in some more of that black soot so that we have a little bit of a darkness kind of creeping in along the edges, which will match with the Desert Canyon backdrop frame that we already created. So just a little bit of that black soot is going to go a long way. I don't want to make it too dark, but it's going to blend really nicely with that lucky clover once I start to go over the edges of it with that ink blending tool. And I'll work back and forth between those two until I'm happy, and then eventually I'll go back to the cracked pistachio in the center. And then I can set this panel aside to dry as well. Once it has, I'm going to pop it in my MISTI, and I am going to treat this with a Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool. And I want to make sure I have plenty of powder on there because I don't want any of my embossing powder sticking to that Distress Oxide ink. And I even went back to my old EK Success powder tool to just pour a little bit of the powder out because that one's been clogged forever, just to make sure that that was really well treated before I go ahead and stamp my sentiment using Versamark ink. It's just a clear sticky ink that works great for embossing because it grips a hold of that powder and holds it into place while you heat set it. So I'm going to coat that with some Lawn Fawn white embossing powder, just pouring that over the sentiment and tapping off any excess from behind until that is really well coated. And then I'll get my heat gun heating up off to the side and then bring that to the cardstock, both the front and the back, and melt that powder until it's all bright white and shiny. And I did get a few stray bits of powder, but I just took my craft pick and kind of scraped those off afterwards. Then I'm going to stamp on the inside of my card. I'm using Lawn Fawn Cilantro cardstock and stamping in Noble Fur. And I picked the little jellyfish image and the sentiment, "'Tis the season to be jelly." So I stamped that down twice, and then I did the "'tis" part a third time because it hadn't gotten quite as good of an impression. And then I also added a little winky face to him and a couple of music notes. And then I'm ready to start assembling. So I've added a ton of foam tape to the back of that desert canyon backdrop. I want to make sure that it is really well supported so that it will go safely through the mail when it comes time to mail my Christmas cards. So I'm just peeling off all of those little release papers. I like to keep a little dish off to the side to collect all of those so I can just dump them in the trash when I'm finished. But once I'm done with that, I'm going to line this up over the ocean part of the background and make sure that is on there nice and straight. All the corners are matching up, and then I'll press that down into place. Then I'll grab my card base and add some liquid glue to the back of the background, the focal panel, and then I'll pop that on top. And then I can bring in my images. So I'm going to lay out a few of the larger images and make sure that I have those where I want them before I start gluing things into place. I wanted to have the Christmas tree kind of tucked behind that large rock that the mermaid is sitting on. And then her and the little crab are going to be having their Christmas gift exchange. So I'm going to put the castle, which is his little house, over on the right hand side. And I'll have some of those little plants and greenery and some rocks over there to balance out the ones that are on the left. So once I have things laid out, just the main images there, and kind of figured out their placement, then I can start adhering things down. It's really important to me to kind of figure out the layout before I start gluing things because number one, this glue dries really quick, so there's not much of an opportunity to change things around once you've decided on something and added that glue. But also it just helps me see that the scene is in balance and that it's just coming together the way that I want it to before I commit to it permanently. So I added my Christmas tree over on the left and then the large rock in front of that, and then I'll have my mermaid sitting on the edge of it. And then I will start adhering the images on the right hand side, and I'm always working back to front. So whatever images are going to be pushed back in the scene by having other images layered on top of them, that is what I'm going to glue down first. So I've got my two little plants over there with my Christmassy colors, and then they're kind of grounded by that rock. And then I'll add my sandcastle, which is going to be my little crab's house. So he's going to be coming out of his house to have this little Christmas exchange with his friend the mermaid. I'm going to add another little piece of that kelp or seaweed back behind the castle just because we have that large Christmas tree on the left hand side, so I wanted a little bit more height on the right to match it. And then I'm going to figure out my placement of my crab. They're each going to be holding a gift, so I need to have room for both of those between them. So that means I'm going to have to just move him back a little bit more over the sandcastle. So once I've figured that out, I can glue them into place. And then he is going to have the little green gift to hold up for the mermaid. And she's got her little clamshell gift for her friend the crab. Next, I'm going to work on my Grinch fish, and I'm going to pop them up with foam tape. Since everything that is on top of the desert canyon backdrop is already on one layer of foam tape, I glued all of those images flat to the card, but the fish are going to be on that ocean backdrop, which is recessed. So I wanted to have a bit of foam tape on them so that they're at the same height as the rest of the images. So I've added a little bit of foam tape to them, and I'm figuring out where I want them to go. And then I can peel off those release papers and pop them into place. So we've got the larger fish swimming in from the left, and then the smaller fish coming in from the right, just slightly above. And then I just have a few other little accessory images. I've got another little rock that I'm going to add back behind the crab and in front of the sandcastle. There's a little clam shell that I'm going to add over on the right. I'm going to put the starfish in the mermaid's hair like a little barrette. And then I've got a conch shell that I'll add over on the left side of the card. And at this point I was kind of noticing that the ocean is a little bit empty. We just have the sentiment and the two fish swimming. So I decided to add in a few little bubbles. So I went back to the Mermaid for You and the Christmas Fishes stamp set and pulled out a few of the little bubble images. And I'm going to stamp them here and there around the fish just to help fill things in a bit more. And I'm doing that in Noble Fur ink, which is the same ink that I used on the inside of the card. So I have like the trio and then like a medium size, and then I grabbed a small bubble to just fill in some of the smaller areas there. And I decided not to go too crazy there. I felt like that was enough. But I still need to add a little bit of glitter, so I'm going to bring in my favorite Stardust Stickles, and I'll add that to my starfish and the ribbons on my gifts. I'll also add it to the white parts of my Santa hat. I covered that part completely, so it will be nice and sparkly. And I also added it to the little red bulbs on the tree and the plant to match over on the right hand side. And then I also decided to fill in the bubbles that I had just stamped so that we would have a bit more sparkle in that ocean as well. And that is going to finish up this card, so I'll lift that up to the camera, give it a little tip into the light so you can see some of that sparkle and shine, and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear your feedback. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you'd like to be alerted whenever I post new videos. All of the products I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!